Generally we look back as part of our big story, but I think today it is fitting to look ahead. Again, this weekend is one we've been focusing on for quite some time. It primarily revolves around the East. Now, we've got Michigan and Michigan State in the early window. Penn State trying to shake off that stunning loss to the Illini. Now they head to Ohio State. That's a primetime game. The West is a big one as well. Iowa trying to remain at least on the fringes of that playoff discussion. They visit a Wisconsin team that still controls its own destiny in the division. And then a week from tomorrow, we get our first playoff ranking. So a chance to see what the committee is thinking. We're going to break down the games in a bit, but I want to go big picture. This felt for a long time like it would be the biggest week of the Big Ten season. And now I'm beginning to wonder, with Penn State having lost, whether the biggest week of the Big Ten season is when Ohio State plays whoever wins between Michigan and Michigan State. What do you guys think? I mean, is this still the weekend we anticipated it would be?
Well, it probably isn't because of the buildup. But to me, it's still a significant weekend. Even though Penn State has lost their game, I still think it's going to be a great situation for all the teams to have an opportunity to compete this week. So, yes, it's not as big as it could have been, but it's still going to be an outstanding weekend.
The reason I'll say it is because of the way you phrased that question, that we don't know who is the second best team in the East. And we will know that coming out of this. We've been waiting for this for the Michigan schools.
Right. I guess my point is simply that it felt like there were going to be 4 playoff contenders playing on Saturday, and now we're down to 3, right? I mean, it would take crazy circumstances for Penn State to be in that picture. So I hear what you're saying. I mean, look, it's huge in that it sets up whatever that biggest weekend is for us to find out which one it is. And so no doubt, look, I'm not trying to diminish it in any way. I think it is interesting that the emphasis or the focus has shifted entirely to Michigan State as the biggest game. I mean, you could have debated Ohio State, Penn State. Of course, if Penn State were to win, then that result becomes the biggest result of the weekend. But what does it say about the Big Ten, kind of more nationally, Nicole, that we're at this point in the season, we're essentially in November. I mean, it's going to be the next to last day of October. And here we are with the biggest game, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country, involving 2 teams, neither which is named Ohio State.
Yeah, I think it's great. And this is something that we have been hoping for in the sport, right? Not just in the Big Ten, but it's great to be happening in the Big Ten as well. But we've been looking for teams to emerge. We've been looking for teams that want to take that step from good to great and great to elite. And it's been a few years of the same teams. And we could certainly still end up with Ohio State and Oklahoma, and maybe we don't have it as much, and just Clemson is the drop-off this year. But I think the idea of talking about different teams, seeing paths to the playoff for different teams, that's new and that's exciting. And I think it's great that we were really having these conversations. And we've talked about this a lot on the show, that the second place team in the East is going to be in that playoff conversation if their only losses to Ohio State, let's say, of the Michigan schools that win this game. Like, you're going to have these conversations in ways that we haven't really since 2016. Probably the last time that we had conversations about non-Ohio State teams. And so, like, the fact that all these teams have been ranked, the way we've talked about them, the way that we've trusted and built up these teams is really healthy, I think, for the sport and for us not to only talk about the same 5 teams all season long.
It's kind of a conversation that people want to have when you start to talk about expansion, having all these teams involved. But I think it's significant. I think it also is a byproduct of scheduling as well.
How so?
Just from the way you have these 2 Michigan teams playing this late, undefeated, is great. I love the fact that that's the way that's setting up. But I think also it speaks to recruiting. We talked a little bit about this on Saturday, that these other teams are still getting a lot better players. The coaching has gotten better in the East from top to bottom, and I think that's significant, and we're starting to see it play out on the field, and I think that's a big part of what's going on.
Yeah, no doubt. And I do think that kind of as we've talked about the Big Ten's brand through the years, and this is not unique to the Big Ten. I mean, I'll preface this statement by saying you could certainly say this about the ACC, and the Pac-12 is in even worse shape, and it's not even close. But the Big Ten brand has been so closely identified with Ohio State, and so that there is this conversation around the Big Ten that revolves partially, but not entirely, around the Buckeyes, I think is really good for the Big Ten. I mean, you look at, like, ACC has nowhere else to turn, and that's not to diminish Wake Forest in any way, and Pitt's become a really nice story. But I just don't think people are talking about those programs in the same way that they're talking about Michigan, Michigan State, to a lesser extent, Iowa. They certainly were talking about Iowa like that a couple of weeks ago. That you have so many teams that are viable in that national conversation says a lot about the league.
And you're talking about national brands finally playing at a level that we've been expecting them to play. Yeah. And I'm talking specifically about Michigan, right? When Michigan is playing well, that is a national brand that goes from coast to coast and people get excited about, or they hate them, right? So it brings a certain level of intensity, good or bad, to the fan bases that are out there, and I think it's good. And this is really the first time we've seen Michigan be in this type of situation in a very long time.
One thing that I'll add about Michigan State, too, is we've talked about how quick this turnaround is and the quality of the coaching and the way that Mel Tucker is building this as a little SEC program in terms of the athleticism and all of that. But how remarkable is it that it's year 2, we see a path to the playoff, they're a top 10 team. It immediately got that national respect because it's Michigan State's program that's been to the playoff. But also we know if you're going to make it through the Big Ten, you're going to be a playoff contender. That's what's different about those ACC teams and some of the teams in the other leagues, that we still feel like, okay, maybe you're undefeated in the ACC. Are you a playoff team? We're not having that conversation in the way that we are with the Big Ten teams, even in just year 2 of what Mel Tucker is building.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think what Mark D'Antonio did was he built up the credibility once again of Michigan State as a national brand, and it certainly was. I mean, look, they're a national championship contender in the 1960s. They were one of the best teams in college football, but it had been a while since they were talked about in that breadth. They had a Rose Bowl team in the 80s under George Perlis, and they were certainly a good program. But to go from being a good program to a program that, kind of to your point, Nicole, that people don't wonder, well, is this for real or is this some sort of a mirage? In the way that they're wondering about Wake Forest right now.
It's the way they're built and the history.
Yes.
You're right, absolutely.
Yeah. I think a big part of history is once you've been able to achieve something like that, Michigan State and what Coach D'Antonio did for this program, getting them back to prominence on a national level, means that you can do it again.
You have credibility.
Yes, and that you, as a program, you've been there. So you know what it takes to get there. You just need to look back and look at the plan, look at the blueprint, and you can get there. But it's no question that what Michigan State is doing, they've elevated not only Michigan State's brand, Mel Tucker's brand has been elevated as you go through this. And as this game gets ready to be kicked off this weekend, it's going to be huge for both programs.
How did the Penn State loss, Nicole, in your mind, impact the Big Ten's ability to get 2 teams in the playoff? Is that path still there, or does Penn State losing? I mean, it clearly eliminates Penn State, again, barring something just bizarre happening, right? It's not just that they've lost twice, but it's that they lost to a team that fairly or unfairly is perceived as not being worthy of beating a playoff contender. Right. But what does it mean kind of bigger picture for the Big Ten? Because we've outlined all of these different scenarios, and as you've talked about, many of those scenarios have involved the second-place team in the East. So is it just that it eliminates one of the possibilities of a second-place team in the East, or does it somehow diminish the Big Ten more broadly?
Well, I think it's going to depend on how Penn State plays from here on out, because if they are able to stay as a top 25 team, and if they rebound, right, if this doesn't spiral and just cost them the rest of the season, and Sean Clifford does get healthier and they're able to do some things, then it's still a quality opponent, a quality win. Because part of the reason that I see that path for the second place team in the East is if you believe that this is the best division or one of the 2 best divisions in all of college football, that means your resume is going to be really strong. You're going to have a lot of points that you're going to talk to in games that, you're going to look at the tape and you're going to say, this was a really good win and here's why. If Penn State can still be that for other teams and still be a game that everyone gets up for and we learn something about these teams, then absolutely, sure. Those teams are going to have to get eliminated, right? There was only going to be 1 second-place team in the East anyway. But the question is really just what happens to Penn State from this point on, because you could see it going a number of different ways.
But I think if you're a Penn State fan, you're still going to be excited because you saw the team stumble poorly last year coming out of the gates, but they were able to rebound. I think this is pretty much similar to the same thing that happened last year, not to the degree, but just because you lose a game doesn't mean you're out. Does it hurt the Big Ten getting 2 in? And I think I agree with you, Nicole. It depends on how this Penn State team rebounds. And I do believe they will rebound. This isn't a bad football team by any stretch of the imagination. They can play the game. They just had some issues. And I think it'll be interesting to see where they are next week this time with the committee.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see where they stand. And I would argue, I think from a Penn State fan perspective, you got to beat Michigan or Michigan State or Ohio State here down the stretch to restore that faith that you were talking about. And so they'll have lots of opportunities. Before we dive specifically into these games, and we're going to break down Ohio State and Penn State and Michigan State, anything else we learned big picture about the playoff this weekend? As again, it's 8 days, so there's a whole nother set of games to be played before the playoff rankings come out. But anything else in your mind that really stood out?
Yeah, I think we just really need to revisit Oregon, because I think people wrote them off as soon as they lost. And much in the same way Ohio State is very much in the playoff conversation, Oregon is too. And when you look back, that win against Ohio State is going to look better and better. I think we're going to see the playoff committee actually look at the result of that game and not just say, well, okay, we're going to put Ohio State like 3 spots ahead of Oregon, which is how it is in the AP poll. So I think that head-to-head result is going to factor in. And Oregon's loss came without the offensive coordinator, Joe Moorhead. We see the impact of him. We saw it in the Ohio State game. We saw it against UCLA this week. So I just think the one thing I learned is just to not forget about Oregon when you're talking about the college football playoff, because I think too many people are doing that.
It's so interesting. And I think Alabama's probably the only team that we don't think this way about. But we're so quick to one loss, and particularly if we believe that this is an elite program. Once they have one loss, it's like, oh, it's over. They're done. There's no way they can get it back. But it's also fascinating when you think about the offensive coordinator and Coach Moorhead not being a part of it, and the committee most likely that'll go into where they drop or where they put Oregon. So to have a player or a coach that's really not involved in the game plan on the field that wasn't there, it'll be interesting to see. And I don't know that we've seen that before.
Well, and this is something that the committee ends up changing the behavior of the poll voters, because they're really not thinking that. They're just sliding teams in. They're thinking, okay, Ohio State's figured some stuff out. As soon as the committee tells us that that is an important factor, or the head-to-head result, remember these two teams played, then everyone else
on the home field of Ohio State, too,
everyone else will remember it. So that type of stuff is going to be what's really interesting about that first ranking. But other than that, I mean, I think all these top teams continue to have flaws. They're not always great. Oklahoma's still shaky. All those things are still true.
Yeah.
Another dominant performance by Ohio State on Saturday night. Went into Bloomington and absolutely walloped Indiana 54-7. Was the Buckeyes' 22nd straight win in conference play, the second longest streak of all time. Still have not lost a Big Ten game under Ryan Day. All but one of those victories has come by a double-digit margin. OSU clearly the team to beat in the Big Ten in your mind, or will Michigan or Michigan State have something to say about that, or maybe Iowa?
They will have something to say about it, but today, right now, as we sit here, they're the best team. They're playing the best as far as I'm concerned. You look at an offense that's so explosive defensively. We've been trying to ding this team because of what's happened defensively with them, but they continue to play at a high level. I think it's just tough to beat this team. Now, they still have to go out and play those games, but right now, the way I see it, when I watch the tape, they're the best team right now.
You talked about the schedule and the way that it played out. It worked out really well for Ohio State.
You think?
It gave them the time to work out everything that they needed to work out before the big games after the Oregon game. And now we really see them firing on all cylinders. And that offense, they're averaging 8.44 yards per play. That's the best in the Power 5 by a good margin. And that's the envy of this is a year where we've had so many inconsistent offenses and all the top teams all across the country. Georgia, that's our question mark with them, right? This is a luxury to have, and they're so confident. And you see that every single snap now. That is something that's going to win them these games down the stretch, too. So I think that piece, and then having time to work out the kinks defensively, try different things, you have to say that right now.
And this is a team, when you listen to Ryan Day speak. If you go back even the first games, he's always so focused on just the process of getting the team each and every week to get better. They knew they have things that they have to work on, things they need to get better at, but he doesn't try to get it done, and most coaches don't, but he speaks about it a lot from the podium. He's not looking down the road. He's really focused in on right now. And you really saw that development with Stroud, in my opinion, when you watched him just get better and better each week. Then he hits the bye week. He had a little bit of an injury, and he's bounced back. And the confidence he's playing with right now is just undeniable. We also mentioned this on Saturday, the fact that Jeremy Rucker, the tight end, is now involved, and they're going to continue to keep him involved.
Yeah.
How do you stop this team?
Well, I don't know that you do. And to your point, Nicole, because I have nothing better to do with my life, every Sunday I've been tracking this gap between 1 and 2 in yards per play. So the gap between the best Power 5 yards per play, which is Ohio State, and number 2 is the same as the gap between number 2 and number 33. So I mean, that tells you how much better they are than everybody else. And your colleague, Bill Landis, did you see this stat that he had? This is unbelievable. The last 156 plays that C.J. Stroud has been at quarterback for the Buckeyes, they've scored 150 points. Okay, like think about that for a second. Like that's just, it boggles the mind. Okay, so let me ask you guys this as we try to put into perspective this game against Penn State. Now I want to get to the Nittany Lions. I don't want to give them short shrift here because I think they're really interesting. If Ohio State wins this game, do we learn anything more about them? Like, in other words, do they gain any credibility in people's eyes if they win this week? Or do we only learn something about them were they to, perish the thought from a Buckeye fan perspective, lose the game?
I think we do learn a lot about them playing against Penn State and really their offense. We know how good it is, but now they're going to be challenged in this game. Not having P.J. Mustipher for Penn State obviously is a huge blow for this defense. But still, it's still a good defense, particularly in the back end of that. So we're going to see some wide receivers and secondary players. We're going to see some good battles there. So Stroud's going to have to make some decisions. Penn State's going to have to turn them over. But I do think we learned something about them from an offensive standpoint. Although, like I said, we know how good they are, but the talent level is being ratcheted up a bit.
Yeah, and I still think, hopefully Sean Clifford's a little more healthy. You still have Jahan Dotson. You still have weapons in the offense. I mean, obviously, Penn State struggled with the run game, but they can be explosive. And there are certain things that we have seen Ohio State offenses in recent years, when they've struggled, it's been giving up big plays, giving up explosive plays. Penn State has explosive athletes that they can possibly still get into space. I mean, we didn't see it a ton against Illinois, right? Like that was a struggle. But I do think that there will be moments where we will learn things. It may not be a huge challenge all the time, but there will be moments where they are stressed.
Which is a head scratcher, Nicole, when you talk about the athletes that they have, particularly Dotson, that you couldn't move him around and try to create some matchup problems versus Illinois,
who had the worst pass efficiency defense in the Big Ten coming in.
So they're going to have to find ways to get Dotson involved in matchups this week against Ohio State.
Well, let's dive a little bit more into Penn State. And again, the game was just crazy. They fell to Illinois in 9 overtimes, which in terms of the number of OTs was the longest game in college football history. Now, keep in mind, 7 of those overtimes involved just one play for each team. Again, the new rule this year, once you get to the third OT, each team runs 1 2-point conversion play, so play from the 3-yard line. They both failed to convert on their first 5 attempts, the Illini eventually winning it on the Casey Washington play you saw there. I want to focus on Penn State. We'll get into Illinois here as we get later into the week, and obviously a huge win and a huge boost for Brett Bielema. But kind of what now for the Nittany Lions, in your guys' opinion?
Well, they better figure out how to execute, because that's what that game came down to, execution. There were plays that were there to win the football game for Penn State. And the ball was a little outside. It might have been a little high. It wasn't caught. Blocking may have not been perfect. But it comes down, they're looking at that film yesterday, and if they watch it as a team, they're looking at it today, and they're saying, we had our opportunity. Don't let this happen again, because we were in a position to control things, and we didn't take care of our own business.
Yeah, I think one thing that jumped out to me was the spillover effect coming out of their first loss of the season, and then a second loss that was inexcusable. Right? This is the 4th time in 5 years that their first loss of the season was immediately followed by a loss. So they got to do something where they snap out of it. This has got to be in the rear view window, especially with the Buckeyes in town, because you cannot let anything spiral from that game into the next one.
Haven't been great coming off buys under James Franklin either, so that's another area. I don't want to leave this discussion without discussing the overtime rule. This was the first time we had seen it really kind of in its full glory. Euphemistically speaking. I'm interested in both your takes. I have an opinion certainly on this as well, but what do we think of this latest iteration of the overtime rule?
So I understand the point. The point is to have less total plays. We all watched that LSU A&M game that sparked this, that went 7 overtimes in the old format.
Yeah.
So it's definitely working the way that they intended it. I'm sure they thought that there would be more scoring. I feel like it should have started later. It felt like we immediately rushed into this weird format, and you're running back and forth on the field. So I didn't love it. I would have preferred a tie because it felt like a game that both teams were very even. I would start it in the 5th overtime. I'm not against it. I just, like, how many 2-point plays does a team have?
That's a good point. Not a lot.
Well, with these two teams, it seemed very few.
Yeah.
Not a lot.
Effective plays. They may have plays, but not effective ones.
And you know, the other thing, what I don't like about it, it almost takes a lot of the strategy and the coaching, setting up next play. It kind of takes
not really
that out
football,
of it.
right?
No, it takes that away from it. And I do understand the fact that the number of plays and the effect on the players. I get it. It just felt really, really strange to have a game play out like that at the end.
And that number of plays was still roughly the equivalent of a couple more overtimes at a minimum, right? I mean, assuming maybe someone would have gotten a first down in there and gotten a new series of downs. But I mean, you know, if you think about how many plays each team played after that, it's 7 plays, right?
Yeah, 14.
In that format, right? Yeah. So 14 total. So it's not like it completely diminished the number of plays. I do, and I agree with you, like this didn't feel like football, but you know, we decide World Cups on penalty kicks.
That's what it felt like, though, right?
But it did. But I mean, like, literally the most important championship globally is decided on something which has very little to do with the actual sport. So I'm not, like, there aren't many great ways to decide these things, but this certainly falls under the category of not a great way. Well, what's interesting, how about DiNardo's suggestion, right? We're sitting there on the set, and Jerry says, you know, this really hampers the passing team more than it hampers the running team. And, of course, Penn State is the better passing team. And he said, could you imagine having the chutzpah to say to your offensive players, false start. Let's back this thing up 5 yards, and let's give ourselves more room to throw a pass. Because clearly it hurt Penn State, given how good they are in the passing game.
Well, what if it wasn't a 2-point play spot? What if it was the 10-yard line? And you got one play?
Well, it's, yeah.
I said let's throw out all sorts of crazy
ideas. Or a couple
ideas.
of plays.
Or a couple
Maybe
of plays.
Maybe 2 plays, right?
I think this is just another opportunity for a committee to come together and discuss it, right? Because this is, you really, you can put it in rule books, right? But you really don't have any idea ultimately how it's going to play out. Now we've seen it play out, and we're like, I don't know if that's necessarily the right way. So I think it just gives, you know, some people an opportunity, coaches, to get in the room and try to figure it out and massage this rule and see if you can come up with something better.
Bring back the tie.
Yeah.
What if it's after a certain amount of overtime?
No one wants ties. No, but
I would have been fine with a tie for this one.
Back on Big Ten today, first time since 1964 that Michigan and Michigan State will enter their annual meeting as top 10 teams. You see, it was kind of commonplace in the late 50s and early to mid 60s, but again, has not happened since then. So hard to believe. By a lot of measures, this will be the biggest Michigan State game of many of our lifetimes. And so let me start with this question to our resident expert in this rivalry, although much of her focus has been on the football game, the touch football game?
The Daily State News. Yes, it's a touch football game between the student newspapers.
Okay. Which I don't want to diminish that rivalry at all.
Oh, it's very heated. It will take place on Friday night. The Daily has a 15-year winning streak here. We'd just like to point that out. So that's the big game of the week. That's Friday.
But the secondary game, that's the one that many people who are watching this program are probably focusing somewhat more on. I know you have a level of expertise in that, too. Let's start the conversation here. Which program do you think needs this win more?
It's a really interesting question because I think as someone who went to Michigan, has been around that fan base and the history and everything tied there, you'd have to say it's Michigan because this is a year, especially as they're trying to prove that they are good. that this is a team that can contend for a Big Ten championship, contend for the college football playoff, you absolutely have to take care of business against your rivals. And so, you have to beat a good Michigan State team, a Michigan State team that is emerging, that is building something special, and you have to beat Ohio State. Like these are the games that you have to, and Notre Dame, when they're on the schedule, is one of those games. But this is a year that's like they're trying to prove something, right? We've talked about this so many times. Okay, they were good in September. Well, we've seen that before.
Yeah.
They've been good in the early October. Well, we've seen that before.
Yep.
Well, take care of business against your rivalry games. In your big games, the ones that decide the Big Ten representative from the East, the ones that decide who goes to the college football playoff, you have to take care of business. And this is the type of game that Jim Harbaugh needs to win to set up the things that they want to win under Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah. You're right. It's such a fascinating question because you can make the argument for both sides, and you've done a great job making the argument for Michigan. But I think Michigan State also has a lot to prove in this game, and a lot of times they're looked at as the little brother, as we've so often heard the Mike Hart quote that I'm sure we'll see some point this week that Michigan State will be playing. But I think Michigan State is building something, right? And they're trying to get to this point where they can get over the top under Mel Tucker.
Yes.
They've done it before, but now they're trying to do it under Mel Tucker, a new coach, and we all believe that there's a coaching staff that's getting it done and it's going to have success. So there is a lot of heat to me and a lot of pressure for the Michigan State to be able to pull this off. But on the other hand, right, we've been waiting for Jim Harbaugh and this Michigan program to take the next step, and now's this opportunity.
Okay, so I think it just depends what question is asked, right? Like, which program needs this win more? I think it's clearly Michigan. I don't think there's any question that it's Michigan, and it's for all those reasons that you guys both outlined, right? Mm-hmm. They haven't won the games that you need to win a Big Ten championship. This is the program that's won the most Big Ten championships all time, and they're in the longest Big Ten championship drought in the history. They haven't even been to the Big Ten championship game.
To have an opportunity.
Northwestern's been there twice.
That's what happens when the team that's here is in your division. You can't beat them.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. And have they been the second best team in the Big Ten? Not really.
No.
I mean, maybe once.
Yeah, a couple times.
Maybe one, maybe twice, but certainly once. But if the question is like, what fan base does this particular game matter more to? Then it's Michigan State.
Yeah.
Like, I don't
this is the game.
Because this is their biggest game. But I think if you're Michigan and you're trying to prove that this year is different, and again, I've said it before, I'll say it again until it's not a stat that's worth saying. They're 15-14 after November 1st under Jim Harbaugh. Like, these are the games. Again, this game's technically going to be before November 1st. I get that. These are the games that matter in terms of the goals that Michigan sets for its program. So I just don't think there's any doubt that it means more. Now, if Mel Tucker were 6 or 7 years into his build here and he hadn't gotten to a Big Ten championship game or he hadn't won big games yet, then I think maybe you could argue Michigan State because they certainly they've been to the college football playoff. They see themselves in that light. But this is just his second year. Mm-hmm. I mean, everything he's done to this point is gravy, right? They're so much better than anyone thought they'd be.
Yeah, they are, but I still think if you're a Michigan State fan, player, coach, this is a huge game.
And again, I'm not in any way diminishing that. I'm just saying, like, for your program goals.
Yes, both programs have a goal of winning the East and winning the Big Ten title.
For your proving that under your current regime, you have a chance to meet your program goals.
Right now.
Right now?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, it's true. I don't think it's no way to get around it. Michigan needs this game. Their fan base needs this game. Jim Harbaugh needs this game. Everything Michigan needs this game to go in their favor. Problem is they're playing against a really good football team that also wants to win this game.
So this is what you mentioned, like everything on top of what's happening for Michigan State is gravy, right? So it's this is all about expectations. If Michigan's expectations are that this is the year, they changed their coordinators, figured out some things, they've got great running backs, and they've got, a serviceable passing game that we can talk about that later. Yeah. But their expectation is to beat Michigan State, to beat Ohio State, which they would tell you even though they haven't done it in a while, that's the expectation year in, year out, to get to the Big Ten title games. But if Michigan State's expectation in year 2 of a new coach is become bowl eligible, get to a decent bowl, like that's where you're saying, like, you've already achieved certain milestones.
But Mel Tucker will tell you that's not That's not it.
Right.
That's not what I want to do.
Okay, but I guess what and I hear you, and again, internally, like the players going out on that field, like it couldn't mean more to either side, right? But I'm just saying, like when you kind of measure what do you expect out of your football program at this moment in time, heading into the season, I don't know how you can argue that, because I think at a certain point, if Michigan doesn't win this game and then they don't beat Ohio State,
we're right back where we were.
Yeah.
At the end
Then,
of
like,
last year.
what has changed?
What has changed?
I don't know.
We don't know. I mean, we have and we believe these expectations because that's what's put out there by Michigan and what we've known Michigan to be about.
Well, I think
but they haven't been anywhere near that.
But they're way better on defense. Like, there's no question their defense is way better.
No debate about that.
This is what's really hard about one program where there's two games that we're going to determine if they're different or not, right? And we haven't hit those games yet. And so that's where you are, where, again, this is the biggest game on Michigan State's schedule. It matters so much on the day-to-day living in that state who wins this game, absolutely, to everyone. But Michigan, we're talking about where we want to compare them and where they want to be. It's Ohio State. And so this is part of that. This is convincing them that they can win those types of games. This is a big deal. This is a big deal in the standings. But it's more like you're more worried about losing it. Like it's almost like you can't lose it instead of it's a must win. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think there's a fear of losing this game because if you lose this game, that Ohio State game, what does it really mean? Big picture wise.
Well, I'd say I think if you beat Ohio State, given where that rivalry has been.
Well, a lot of Michigan fans will tell you we can lose all the games and beat Ohio State.
But I think you could make an argument that you could lose this game and beat Ohio State, and it's an overwhelming success of a year.
Here's what I
don't think you can reverse it. I don't think you can win this one, lose to Ohio State.
17 straight road games.
17 straight road games against
15.
AP top 15 teams, right? So they have not won since 2006 against Notre Dame, before you were in college. You are the National Sports Writer of the Year. You've built an entire career, right?
Since then.
Yeah, since then, right? Like, think about that.
Yeah.
That's putting it in perspective.
It's a long time. What a season for Rutgers women's soccer. A perfect 10-0 in the conference slate. The first women's soccer team to go undefeated and untied in the Big Ten since 2005. The Scarlet Knights won the conference regular season title. Amazingly, it is the first Big Ten crown of any kind for Rutgers since joining the league in 2014. Joined by one of the captains of that team, the fifth-year senior Gabby Provenzano, is today's big interview. This is the first ever Big Ten championship team at Rutgers. Gabby, what does it mean to be a part of that?
It's incredible. It's so surreal to be a part of a team who works hard, plays for each other, and just to do it together. We say 28 strong, and we're all sisters, and just to make history and be the first is incredible.
Well, this program has been really close. I mean, you've had 3 straight top 3 finishes in the Big Ten. So what was it, do you think, that got this particular group over the top?
I think we've been so close every year, and just that extra edge. We all came in early in preseason and we set our goals, and we had our goals in mind. And I think just staying together and really utilizing our 28 strong, and it takes everyone to win and be successful.
Now, you are a fifth-year player, so you could have moved on. You chose to come back. And again, I think it's worth repeating for people who aren't aware of the way that things worked out with COVID, but you had a spring schedule, right? And you only had a few months in between before you started up again for the fall. So what swayed you to say, you know what, I'm ready to go through this grind again?
So I talked with Amir Ali, obviously another fifth-year player, and we did this together from day one. And in the spring, it was a shortened season. It wasn't everything we wanted, so we wanted to come back together and make history and do this one last time the real way.
We're seeing some highlights of your team right now, and again, this is a team with a lot of firepower. You mentioned Amira, she's been great. Frankly, Tagliaferri transferred in as well from Penn State. At what point did you realize, man, this can really be a special group?
I realized from honestly day one, the start, there was energy, there was passion, there was grit, and just going into it, we all had our common goals. And I think the biggest thing for us was every game we knew was going to be a hard game, and we had to play to our level. And I think we just keep getting better.
You're a New Jersey native. What does it mean to have this success in your home state?
It's incredible being a New Jersey native, doing it for our fans, our friends, our family, having our parents in the game, seeing them in the stands is incredible. And then just representing the Block R in the state of New Jersey, there's nothing else I would have wanted.
The biggest story in women's soccer this week is the retirement of Carly Lloyd. She's an all-time Rutgers great. She shouted you guys out on social media this week. What did it mean to hear from, again, one of the greatest superstars, certainly in the history of your program, but really in the history of the sport?
It meant so much to us. Carly has been such a great part and huge part of this program, and just having her shouting us out and knowing that we have support and everyone behind us, it just is such an incredible feeling.
So the Big Ten, we're seeing the congrats there from Carly Lloyd, simple and to the point. The Big Ten tournament starting this week. You're going to host Wisconsin on Sunday, so I guess technically it's the beginning of next week. It's a game that'll be on Big Ten Plus. The top seed hosts the conference championship game. So were you to advance all the way through, you would get to play on your home field. How much incentive is that for you and your teammates, not just to win this tournament, but to be able to win it in front of home fans?
I think it's such a massive incentive. We work so hard, and there's so much more soccer to be played. But I think the biggest thing for us is we'll take it game by game. So our only focus right now is playing Wisconsin, and then after that we'll deal with what's next and ahead of us. But it's a great incentive knowing that we have the chance to host it on our home field. Well,
I'm going to ask you to look ahead even a little bit more. So you've won 11 straight games, which is a school record. You're ranked 9th in the country. You're the best team in a really good league. As we spin it forward, how much have you and your teammates talked about the possibility of competing for and winning a national championship?
It's definitely been a goal that's been discussed for this team. We know the potential. We know there's so much more in us. But I think looking at this team, we all have in mind our goals, but we'll focus on one game at a time, which is obviously Wisconsin, and using the Big Ten tournament to help us put us in the best position to get a good seed, and then we'll go from there.
Gabby, I want to talk a little bit more about you. You're not just an accomplished soccer player, but you're a great student. You're very involved in the community. You were nominated for the Senior Class Award, which takes into account athletic performance, but also community service, academic performance as well. In terms of community service, I know you've been involved in a lot of different things during your time at Rutgers. What is the one that has stood out the most to you and made you feel the best?
I think the one thing that stood out to me community service-wise is every summer we do a camp with Officer Bobadilla, who's a local officer here in New Brunswick. And it's a camp where basically we show up and we get to play soccer and do what we love with people in the community. And it's just a way to give back and inspire the youth and let them know that there's so much more ahead of them and just keep their eye on the dream.
Really cool. Let's talk a little bit about your dreams. You are a sport management major. Ultimately, once soccer ends for you, what would you like to do with that?
First and foremost, after being done here at Rutgers, I would like to go try to play professional. But then after that, with my sport management major, I'm looking to pursue a career in statistical analysis for a professional sports team.
Really? So, what would that entail? Tell me, what kind of statistical analysis?
So I could be involved with looking at draft processes or looking at different players and comparing all their stats and seeing how ways we can improve and who's doing better.
All right. I see general manager in your future.